Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard Moglen. Welcome back to a stock market outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. And once again, we're kind of in two different worlds when it comes to the Nasdaq and tech versus the rest of the market and the S&P 500. If we look at the Nasdaq composite chart here in MarketSmith, you can see we're still below this downward trend line here, as well as the 21 EMA, which is this pink line here, and the 50 SMA, which are two moving averages that I basically use to determine market conditions. And we see a lot of choppiness on this chart, but we do see a little bit of changing character on Thursday and Friday, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail later on in the video. But if we go to the S&P 500, you would have no clue that the Nasdaq is that weak. It's bouncing off the 50 SMA, great action on Thursday and Friday. And this Friday actually was a follow-through day, which is basically terminology used in the canceling world to determine when it's safe to get back into the market once a correction has occurred. And a fall through day means basically a gain of at least 1.5% on volume greater than the previous day, which we did get on this Friday. And it's basically a sign that you can start increasing your exposure once again. And definitely that's how I'll be viewing this market. So in this video, as always, we'll go through the indexes day by day, week by week. Then we'll move on to a bunch of stocks that I view as potential next leaders of the uptrend. And then we'll cover my previous watch list, a bit of sentiment from a few different indicators, the IBD Big Picture article, and finally the GMI signal from motionwellblog.com. And starting with the QQQ, which is the Nasdaq 100 ETF, you can see on this Monday, we started the week with a gap up, which I don't like seeing. Often in my experience, they seem to fade very quickly and often pull back to the prior high, the prior close, and then potentially find support there. But overall, this one stuck, and you can see it closed through the 21 EMA, but did get rejected at the 50 SMA. And then on Tuesday, we kind of get what I was expecting on Monday, a fade after the gap up, although it did hold the 21 EMA. And then on this Wednesday, we had once again a gap up, and then a very poor close below the 21 EMA once again, and closing right near the day's lows. And then this Thursday, we had a gap down, a flush, and then a pretty strong close, so a little bit of an expectation breaker here, and kind of the start of a new short-term uptrend. And then on Friday, we had a very strong day, especially at the close. We had a slight gap down, but a very strong rally. If we go to a 5-minute chart, you can see that just the really last half hour was incredibly strong. And look at all the volume coming in just the last 5 minutes. So very strong action to end the week on the QQQ. And overall, the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher. And ideally, I do want to see us close above the 21 and 50 SMA next week. And now getting the weekly perspective, you can see overall we undercut this prior week's low, which is a positive, and rallied strongly. And overall, we were up 0.91% with a weekly closing range of 62.8% and a daily closing range on Friday of 95%. So the expectation from this weekly bar is sideways or higher. And I want to see us close above the 10-week and this week's high rather. And ideally, that would be kind of a 2-2 reversal on a weekly time frame. So that is kind of the expectation here, and we are in a nice stage 2 uptrend because we are above a rising 30-week moving average. So moving on to the SPY, overall this is much stronger. We are up 1.67% this week with a nice weekly closing range of 96.6% and a daily closing range here of 93% on Friday. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher. I love how we undercut this week's low as well as the 10-week and then rallied above it strongly and finished right near all-time highs. So the expectation here is sideways or higher. We are in a nice stage 2 uptrend above an increasing 30-week and 10-week moving average. Next up, we've got the small caps, and overall we had a huge shakeout here, and not as strong a close here because we didn't finish above this week's low, but overall we did finish well off the week's low, which is a positive. And overall, we are down 2.79% here with a weekly closing range of 62.7% and daily closing range on Friday of 98.5%. And the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend at this time. And moving on, we've got SMH, which I view as a potential leadership group. This is the kind of semiconductors here. If you look at the components, here's a bunch of them, and you can see if we sort by weekly change that a lot of them were up 5, even 10%. AMAT looks very, very strong here, and we'll get into that in just a second. And getting back to SMH, overall, as I said, I view this as a leadership group potentially. And overall, you can see that we undercut this week's low, rallied strongly above it, as well as the 10-week, but we didn't quite finish above this prior week's high, so potentially a 2-2 reversal next week. And overall, you can see that we were up 3.41% with a weekly closing range of 99% and a daily closing range on Friday of 99.5%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a nice stage 2 uptrend. Taking a look at the VIX, we are actually below these lows here, so potentially a changing character here. We didn't get a huge spike like what happened when we undercut the prior lows, and overall we're at 18.86. And this week we were down 9.98%, although there's definitely a lot of volatility in those growth stock names. Moving on, we've got Ethereum, and overall it was down 9.73% with a weekly closing range of 52.4%. So it did finish well off its lows, even though it was down quite a bit. And overall, the daily closing range on Friday was 36.4%. And the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher because it finished so well off its lows. But I think it is a negative that's below its 10-week and below these 2 weeks prior lows, which it was kind of consolidating nicely. If we go to a kind of daily chart here, it kind of broke through the bottom of this consolidation right here. But overall, the expectation is higher and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And moving on to Bitcoin, you can see it rallied above its 10-week here after undercutting it. Once again, it closed below the prior week's low, which is a slight negative. And overall, it was down 12.32% with a weekly closing range of 46.9% and daily closing range on Friday of 94.4%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And lastly, we've got the FFTY. And overall, this kind of gives a picture of how a lot of growth stocks performed last week. Very wide ranges and kind of finishing the week off strong if we go to a daily chart, but overall definitely suffering some damage. And overall, it was down 6.41% with a weekly closing range of 42% and daily closing range on Friday of 77%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or I'm going to say lower here because of just this wide range here and not the strongest close. If it closed near the 10-week here, that would be a different story. But my view is sideways or lower, and we are in a nice stage 2 uptrend at this point. So that's it for the indexes overall. Strong rallies end of the week, which is a positive, and let's see if they can carry on the momentum into the next one. So moving on, let's talk about the potential true market leadership. And obviously, this list is still being built as stuff is breaking out, forming quality bases, and obviously all of these could change. But at this moment, these are kind of the potential leading stocks that are acting reasonably well. So going through the charts, first up, we've got UPST. And overall, it started this strong move from this monster gap up 89%, followed through the next 2 days on high volume. Let's go to a main chart here. And then this day was a very strong kind of expectation breaker. It was up so strongly the past few days that I would have liked to see kind of it pretty much just go sideways, tight consolidation, down at most 10%. But we finished below this low and back near this kind of high volume close from the gap up day. So overall, a little bit of an expectation breaker, a lot of volume on this day as well, but it kind of consolidated, pulled back the past 2 days after that, had an undercut and rally on this Thursday, and then a strong follow through on Friday. So overall, this looks like a potential winner, forming a kind of monster gap up, then a nice U-turn here, but it is kind of very wide ranges, very volatile, so definitely a very hard stock to position in, especially if you're trying to manage your risk. But definitely strong numbers, strong theme, AI, and we'll see what happens with this stock. Moving on, we've got UI, which also had a strong breakout. You can see RS new high on this day, as well as price new high. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I didn't pick this stock for my watch list. I must have missed it, but there's a nice kind of consolidation here. It did undercut and then rally above it on Thursday and Friday, and great volume coming in, as you can see down here, well above the average volume. Moving on, we've got RH, which also broke out on this Friday. And you can see a nice kind of setup day here on Thursday. And you've got the pivots here, as well as the kind of prior base pivot right here, which it did close just above of on this Thursday. So that looks very strong. Great volume coming in here. I believe they reported very strong earnings. And next up, we've got SAM, which rallied nicely above its green line here. And you can see once again the setup day off the 50 SMA on this Thursday. Nice volume coming in here. Still not quite at all-time highs, but definitely looks very strong. And you can see the pivot that I drew here. It activated that on this past Friday. So SAM looks pretty good. And next up, we've got AMAT, which on this Wednesday tried to break out and then had a very poor close and then kind of dropped here, but rallied strongly near the 21 EMA, and then a very strong day here. If we go to a 5-minute chart, you can see a very strong close to the day as well, with great volume coming in here. But overall, there is a potential chip shortage in 2021, so we'll see if that affects things to the positive when it comes to chip makers. And as I said, I view SMH as a potential leadership group. A great close here, and we'll see what happens with this stock. Moving on, we've got 5, which has been acting pretty well. Definitely a little bit choppy here. I don't like the volume on this downside reversal, but if this can hold the key moving averages and fall through next week, definitely something that I'll be looking at to potentially position in. Next up, we've got LYFT, and overall, you can see it bounced down here at the kind of prior big resistance point, and then found support nicely at the 21 EMA. Nice undercut and rally on this Thursday, and then fall through a little bit on this Friday, although on lower volume. So we might see this consolidate a little bit for a few more weeks, but definitely something I'll be watching very closely. Moving on, we've got GM, which is right at the prior pivot after pulling back on mostly below average volume. These 2 days are on above average. And I don't like the look of this bar, but overall it is holding that 21 EMA, that 50 SMA, and right near that prior base pivot. Next up, we've got Zim, which is a recent IPO. Very strong action here from its kind of IPO high tight flag base, and now it's finding support at the 21 EMA. This is another one that has very wide ranges, so it's tough to position in, but overall it is acting very well, especially on this Thursday. And lastly, we've got DKNG, which did pull back pretty significantly this past week, but overall it was on below average volume, and it's holding that 50 SMA and also the prior green line, so potentially a good risk reward entry point is coming up next week. So that's kind of my take on potential new market leadership. Obviously, this list is still ongoing, and let me know down below in the comments kind of 1 or 2 names that you think I should add to this list, and make sure it's showing some type of strong RS, good earnings, sales, fund ownership, all those qualities that I look for. And also make sure to take the time now to leave a like down below in the video. It does help me out immensely, and I would really appreciate it. But moving on, let's talk about my previous watch list and how it performed. And overall this week, it was hit pretty hard, although we did have 2 winners, AMAT and SAM, which we talked about just recently. But overall, Uber didn't quite do what I wanted to and consolidate near the 50 SMA and did kind of lose that level. It's still kind of forming this longer term consolidation, potentially a double bottom here type base here with this pivot right here around 60. So that's Uber. SLQT I think is still worth watching. As I said, it's right near the turbulence zone, so definitely could use kind of a longer term base, but did find support at the 50 SMA, and this pullback was on below average volume. So that's SLQT. ETHE as well broke expectations here. Nasty downside reversal bar on this Tuesday, and then fall through to the downside after a small gap up on this Wednesday. Definitely not the action that you want to see through those key moving averages. And so far, it's just still building out this base. Bumble did pull back here on below average volume, but then nice support bar on this Friday. A big upside reversal here, and it actually did undercut this low here, 57.53. So if you were a very quick trader, you could have bought that undercut, set a very tight stop loss. It either worked or it didn't, and then potentially get this last minute rally in that last kind of hour or so. Or even if you don't want to kind of buy this undercut and rally, you could have bought it right here when it was breaking through this short-term consolidation, set a stop at the low of the day and see if it worked. But obviously these are more advanced setups, and definitely you have to be watching your computers very closely to catch this type of move. LDF, we go to a daily chart, pulling back on below average volume, still doing nothing wrong. I love this gentle pullback below the 21 EMA, and we'll see if it can kind of break this downward trend line, if I can actually set it correctly, right there. Next up, we've got TDC, and I don't like the look of these 2 days. This one was on above average volume. This one broke this kind of low of the consolidation, which is a kind of negative expectation breaker, but it is finding support at the 50 SMA for the time being. Apps, very choppy, downside reversal on Tuesday, negative bar on this Wednesday like ETHE, and definitely this needs a little bit more time for amount of base here, especially because it needs to absorb this huge run that it had in 2020. Moving on, we've got ABNB, and this is potentially forming a double bottom base here. Overall, not doing too much wrong. You see this pullback is on below average volume, which is a positive. and we'll see if it can move up next week. And next up, we've got SI, which is forming a longer term base here and found support at the 50 SMA this past week. Did close below it on this Friday, but overall is just forming out a base here. And you can see I've drawn a kind of downward trend line here, which I'm also watching as well. And lastly, we've got MP, which had a very bad reversal here off the gap up and really bad follow through. I believe they announced a secondary here on this Tuesday and broke through the 50 SMA, and now is just forming a longer term base here around this level, around 32, and the high would be about 52. So we'll see if this needs more time. I would like to see it retake this prior pivot, which is at 40.74. So overall, not the best week for my watch list. We did have two nice breakouts in AMAT and SAM, and we'll see what happens next week. Make sure you guys tune in tomorrow on Sunday when I'll be posting my next list of ideas. So let's move on now to sentiment, and overall starting with my sentiment surveys I post every Friday on Twitter. You can see that this week it's pretty much unchanged from the previous one, still at 49.4% bullish. We do actually have more people thinking lower versus about the same, which is interesting, but overall not a significant reading here as it is above 45%. Move on, we've got the name exposure index, which is actually down this week, which is a positive. I do want to see this kind of decreasing here. That's kind of a nice contrarian indicator. And you can see that the put call ratio is actually going in the right direction, which we haven't seen in quite a while. And lastly, we've got the bulls versus bears poll. And overall, this is actually getting more bullish, which is a slight negative. But for the most part, sentiment is going in the right direction. And as always, this is a kind of secondary indicator to me. Overall, the action of the potential true market leaders, growth stock leaders, the market indexes, that's much more important in determining the market health and conditions than these kind of sentiment indicators. So with that said, let's move on to the IBD Big Picture article. The headline is Stock Market Rallies Late, Extends Rebound as Leading Stocks Improve. And overall, they discuss as we went through the strong action, especially in the last 30 minutes, hour. And overall, we got that follow-through day confirmation on the S&P 500. They're now in a confirmed uptrend after that follow-through day indicator. VIPS, DISCA, and AMCX all suffered pretty bad losses here, especially late in the week. If we actually go to VIPS here, we saw this with a lot of Chinese stocks. They got hit very hard on Wednesday and followed through to the downside, although this one did bounce off the 200-day moving average. Something is not right here. Whenever you see like this, a bar like this, somebody is liquidating, so keep that in mind. If we go to DISCA, this looks very similar as well, with actually a much poorer close on this Friday. So I'm avoiding these type of stocks for now. Also, they're not kind of traditional growth stocks as well. And moving on to discuss UI, which we already covered. Nice narrow cup and handle breakout here. GNRC, Generac, found support at the 10-week and has moved into a new buy area. ENTG, TSM, nice bounces on Friday, although TSM is still below the 50-day. And the Dow Jones Transports Index rose to a record high with a 2.3% gain. And going up to their current outlook, it is uptrend resumes, but it is interesting that they're actually keeping on to these distribution days. I don't know if they're waiting for the Nasdaq to fall through to get rid of these, but that is potentially significant. And moving on to the Bushman blog, you can see that the GMI signal is still red. The GMI score was 2 out of 6 on this past Thursday. So overall, my current view is a confirmed uptrend. We had a fall through day on the SPX on this past Friday, and I'll be looking to get into the stocks that are performing well, that are still in the growth space. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I'll see you guys in future videos.